Welcome back to week 3 of My Life Story Project. I'm Christine Williams, your mentor, and this week we'll tackle chapter 2 of your life story, My Adolescence and My 20s it's called. What's wonderful about the stories that are coming out of this project, all written by our membership, are the glorious differences in the stories from different people. So that means we can all benefit from checking out each other's approaches to writing and to life. It's a comforting feeling that so many of us have intentions in common. Remember, after this webinar, you can go online to our Facebook membership. If you haven't registered yet, then go right ahead if you want to. You can share some of your stories there, or if you'd rather keep them to yourself, that's fine. At least you can raise some questions that you might have been thinking about, and you might find that there's a lot of goodwill from others who've already come up against those questions and sorted some answers that they'll share with you. This session I want to move on to your experiences in adolescence and then on into your 20s, experiences that are worth remembering and recording. This can cover school, your studies and your friends, as well as what was happening at home with your parents and brothers or sisters if you have them, or even relatives and friends of the family. What was the atmosphere at home? Were your parents pretty loose about things or strict rule makers and rule keepers? How much support did they give you? How much support did you give to others in your family? And were there any really challenging changes in your family life when you were a teenager? Virginia Woolf writes about a great sadness in her young life that hit her at age 13 in 1895. You can see the notes for some excerpt from Virginia Woolf. On a more positive note, adolescence is a time when you can really move beyond your home ground and venture out into the world and choose your own activities. Going to the cinema, maybe surfing obsessively. Were they longboards in those days? Just going with friends to swim or body surf or to the local shops. Playing team sport, attending a religious activity group or being very irreligious, hanging out with mates. Playing pinball, arcade games or video games like Donkey Kong. Going to parties, drowning in love in that first relationship, with or without your parents' knowledge. Maybe what you chose to do was considered geeky at the time. Maybe it was a very popular in thing to do. Doesn't matter any longer. The list goes on, and there's no right or wrong about anything you chose to do. What's important now is to enjoy writing about that period of your life, when you were young and partly innocent, when life was a fresh adventure every day. Sure, there were studies, homework, assignments to be done, but youth is irrepressible, hope springs eternal. You can remember how it felt to have so much ahead of you. The feeling that adults were getting it wrong and you had so many ideas about how life and society could be improved, and a great energy to get started in adult life. Trying new makeup, your first driving lesson, your first driving license, your first love, or was it? Your first big fight, your first big dispute with your dad, tensions with your mum and her support when you needed it, serious study and exams, deciding where you wanted to work. So, before we move on to your 20s, let's pause to have a writing exercise. Just take any of the ideas I've mentioned and let's see how they apply to your youthful years. We'll take 10 minutes this time, so you should be able to jot down a couple of stories in that time. Then you can just restart our webinar. So now, the writing exercise, My Teenage Years, for 10 minutes. Hi there, and I'm back to continue with the webinar. Your 20s. By your 20s, you think you know all about life, more than your parents who are still stuck back in the dark ages. But it's also very confusing and very often confronting when you realise that different versions of your personality are expected to be put on show for people from different walks of life, age, gender and status. Looking back, the events and special or even awkward occasions from your life in this period can be a big source of humorous storytelling. At work, with friends and partners, with teachers, if you were still studying, or with employers. Now seems an appropriate time to pause for a few minutes to let you quickly write down a story or two which come to you from your early adult years, the decade of your 20s. I'll give you 10 minutes to write, and then if you want to complete the stories after the webinar, that's a good idea. Please also leave some time during the week to complete whatever stories you've started from this age group, which you need to expand on later. So, your writing exercise, 10 minutes from my 20s. Hi again. Hope your 10 minutes was productive. Now for a little bit of what I want to introduce, a very important concept you'll need to put into practice in writing your anecdotes for My Life Story project. You may have heard of it. It's drummed into writing students all over the world. It's called Show, Don't Tell. If you've heard about it, it's a good timely reminder now. If you haven't, here we go with an explanation that you can put into practice in our next writing break starting in a few minutes. Show, don't tell. So, what is known after decades, centuries of books being published, some of them very popular, others not so popular, is that what readers love most of all is to read between the lines, not to have information rammed through their eyes and into their brains. The takeaway message from that is it's important, first of all, that you don't bore them with unadorned facts and figures, followed by opinions about those. That's telling them. Don't tell. Show. Now, telling might be okay from a pulpit. A preacher, a priest, a minister writes a sermon every week and delivers it from on high. That's not going to work for you. You need to keep your reader on side so they'll keep on reading and enjoy your stories. That's the only reason they'll keep reading. It's very easy to put a memoir aside once you get bored. It's the first impulse. But if you're enjoying it, you'll read on, and the best way to achieve that reading on is to give people mind pictures so that the picture you have in your mind's eye of a scene from your earlier life is transferred through your fingertips as accurately as possible to the reader's mind's eye. We live in a world of images. We discussed this earlier, but the important thing to remember now is to keep those word pictures coming. That is, to keep on showing pictures in your writing through your use of words. Painting pictures with words. That way we readers can see for ourselves what the places were like and what the people in your life were like through their dialogue or body language being described at a certain time in a certain setting, being shown to us. Let's take a couple of examples. You can write, he was fat, or you can write, being overweight made it a struggle for him to get out of his chair. You can write, she was beautiful, or you can write, as soon as she walked into the room, the young men were transfixed by the sight of her, dressed in a flowing light blue gown, her blonde hair in a French roll to show off her slender neck, and her graceful manner beguiling them. You see how the picture allows you to make up your own mind about whether this is a beautiful woman or not. You're not being told so, but you can come to that conclusion on your own without being told. The story is much more believable because you as a reader are forming pictures in your mind as the story goes along. So it's that kind of writer of your own story that you need to be, a storyteller who sets a scene of a time and place by enticing the reader with pictures of what's going on. You will have set up the scene, you'll give some description of the person or people in that time and place, setting, then you'll introduce some dialogue so we know how the people in the scene speak, what they say and how they relate to one another, and you'll introduce some actions by them or reactions by them to outside circumstances. Then we readers will be on the side of your story and we'll be seeing the world through your eyes, through your impressions of what was going on. So let's have a 5-minute writing exercise now about your adolescence and 20s, and I'll give you some prompts. Click on pause, choose any one of the following sentence starters, then write for 5 minutes before you press the webinar screen again to come back to me. On my first day of school, I expected, once I'd settled into the classroom, meeting my mates outside of school was a new experience for me, and sport was a big thing in my world at that stage because Basically, I was shy and it seemed an effort to. It seemed a waste that. University was another whole world of. I didn't get past first base with. I wasn't the type to avoid conflict especially. Harmony between people was what I was used to, but... So, they're the prompts for your 5-minute writing exercise. Off you go. So that's great. You've now made quite a start on Chapter 2. You'll need to expand on your story in your own time, that is according to the daily timetable you'll use from now on to get through the writing of your life story. It's always best to complete a story in one sitting, so I'd suggest you get back to it as soon as possible after the end of this webinar. I'll give you another couple of writing exercises during this week's webinar and more prompts to choose from, and whichever you don't choose now you can move on to later in your story, or think up your own beginnings of sentences, as you'll be doing for all the stories about your life that you'll be writing. I'll just present a reading to you now, which you should find stimulating, from Anne Lamott's bestseller Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing and Life. Let's hear how she paints the scene of a not quite successful attempt by her aunt to use a new lemonade making machine at a time in the aunt's life when she was stressed, recently divorced, and she wanted so much to have fun making the best lemonade with her nephews and nieces, and the result was that it didn't even taste of lemon. I perfectly remembered the crummy linoleum on my aunt's kitchen floor, greying beige speckled with black, and how it wore away to all black near the sink, and how at its most worn place rotten wood showed through, and how all those cousins, some so young they must have thought ice-cold sugar water was about as good as the going got, stood at the sink with us, older kids, in a ring around my aunt, and how close I felt to them all, how much a part of a wheel. It touches me so deeply, the poignancy of the crummy linoleum, of my aunt's pain and her pride in her lemonade making machine, of all the ways in which we try to comfort ourselves, of her wanting to make us better lemonade, of us wanting to make her better, the enthusiasm with which we drank and held up our glasses as if we were hoisting steins at Oktoberfest. That's the kind of descriptive writing with heart that makes the reader feel as if he or she is there with the writer. You find that kind of depth to writing memoir the more you write. Yes, I'm saying that as a form of encouragement for you to keep on with your writing. The worst thing you should do is think, oh, my writing isn't as good as that. As you haven't been writing very long, of course it would be surprising if it was, but it can be good if it's in your own authentic voice. You can just take on board how Lamotte approached the telling of the story. There was more to it than I read out just now, about setting up the lemonade machine with its holding tank, the ice cubes, the sugar, the lemon seeds, yes, more sugar needed, what Lamotte referred to as the lemon gouge. The whole operation didn't go well at all. The aunt completely forgot to add the actual lemon juice. The story had sadness and humour entwined, and a most effective technique because it draws on the reader's feelings, and it's so much like life. At times we can all break through sadness and see the funny side of a tragedy, almost as if it's too much for the human condition to cope with, so the mind seeks relief in humour, even bitter humour, dark humour, or complete ridiculousness, giving way to whatever the universe may throw at us. Many great writers, from Shakespeare down through the centuries, have made use of judicious humour as a balance to a heavyweight text. It's a technique that doesn't usually arise at the outset of a writing project. But if you can recall times of comical abandon, by all means share them. Back to some actual writing here and now. I'd like you to go to the list of suggested sentence starters above, I'll put the list up again here, and write me another piece from your life, with a bit of humour if you like, using one of the sentence starters I suggest, or your own sentence starter. Pause the webinar for 5 minutes and I'll see you in 5. If you're new to writing as a discipline, can I suggest now that you need to form a new habit for writing, to incorporate it into your daily routine as soon as possible. That means now you need to set aside a particular period for writing activity every day. You see, you need to form a new habit. Our minds and bodies respond very well to habits. That's why it's so hard to throw off a bad habit. A coffee in the morning, several coffees a day, a drink after work, too many drinks after work, smoking, gambling. The fact is, it's harder to throw off a bad habit that's given you pleasure because your body and mind remember the pleasure and want to repeat it. When we're talking addiction, that's often about a chemical in a product, and it's even harder to break away. But there are always the happiness hormones released in the brain for every pleasurable activity. So that's an inbuilt mechanism encouraging us to repeat the pleasure of writing for yourself, not as part of your work. So now we have a very simple understanding that to make this course work for you, you need to 1. Enjoy it, 2. Repeat the enjoyment, 3. Form the habit of enjoyment. That way you produce enough writing every day to complete the course in 8 weeks. So what is enough? What is enough writing to create a whole book? How long is a piece of string? I'd say anything from 30,000 to 60,000 words could be considered a good total effort. Sounds a lot? Definitely it's not. Not really when you're writing freely. The important thing is to place time signposts into your day to let your mind and body know it's time for your break from the humdrum to engage in your happy memoir writing. I suggest you dedicate 1 hour to 1.5 hours a day, or even more once you get the rhythm of it, to receive the benefits of this course. You can only improve the more you write. Remember, it's your time and it's only going to last 8 weeks, so you need to make the most of it. You may not get this chance again. Your significant others need to acknowledge your needs, not forever, just for 8 weeks. Remember, an hour a day at the very least. If you write 2,000 words on each incident you recall, then you'll reach your target over the whole project period easily. If you do a minimum and write 2,000 words only on all the sentence starters in this chapter alone, then you'll have written 20,000 words in this chapter alone. Plus, there are the stories where you began with your own original sentences. Go ahead and complete those stories, and you'll see it's possible. No, it should be very doable. This interlude in your life is about freedom and reflection, yours alone, not necessarily showing it to your partner, as these are your personal thoughts captured in writing. Time enough to show them once you're finished your first draft. So, now to another reading to encourage your own. This is another reading of the work of Anne Lamott when she was a young woman and had her tonsils out, describing what she learned from the after effects. When about a week had gone by, she still had pain in her throat and wanted a repeat prescription of antibiotics, but the dental nurse told her she simply needed to buy some gum to chew. So finally, my best friend Pammy went out and bought me some gum, and I began to chew it with great hostility and skepticism. The first bites caused a ripping sensation in the back of my throat, but within minutes all the pain was gone, permanently. I think something similar happens with our psychic muscles. They cramp around our wounds, so those wounds never have a chance to heal. And you can see more of that in the notes on Anne Lamott, the full excerpt. I'm wondering if you've found your psychic muscles and cramping up in anticipation of writing out of fear that you won't be able to manage it, or manage it at all well. Now that is silly, but it's a common condition. The best thing you can do is put that metaphorical gum in your mouth, or rather in your brain, and have your brain cells begin the equivalent of chewing. Start recalling, start enjoying, and see how loosened up your language becomes. Strong verbs carry the vital action. Vocab strengthens in describing people, time and place. You're on your way. Don't forget to go back over the suggested sentence starter list. There's no time like the present, as well as every day over the coming week. See you again soon in our next webinar for Chapter 3.